We see you.
Are you wearing your short shorts?
Yeah, that's me.
Are you celebrating anything in particular with your short shorts?
No, I'm just trying to look sexy in these tight pants with the fabulous red and the gold. Sorry, I got a small sparky down.
Elon, I think you might have broken, I'm not sure about the internet, but definitely Clubhouse. This room is easily the biggest room the app has had, and you're just putting all sorts of pressure on it. This is amazing. This is a historic moment.
All right, is it working?
Absolutely. Just give it a minute, because we promised we'd start at 10 p.m. and I think a few more people are going to trickle in, and then we'll get going for what should be probably a historic first ever time for you on Clubhouse. It's going to be amazing. So just give 30 seconds, I'm going.
Okay. By the way, can you let in Vlad from Robin Hood?
My phone just blew up when we started the room with people trying to get in. So first of all, everyone, thank you for joining us for what is really a historic episode. I will come to our very, very special guest in a second, but just to quickly introduce the rest of the room, we have Gary Tan, Initialized Capital. We have my significantly better other half. We took us on a tour of SpaceX. We have Steven Sinofsky of ex-Microsoft fame, and we have the one and only Mark Andreessen. But to introduce our special guest, and this person truly needs no introduction, the founder of Tesla, SpaceX, The Boring Company, Neuralink, PayPal, and there's a bunch more. Elon Musk, welcome to Clubhouse.
Thank you.
So again, welcome. We've been waiting all day. This is the longest wait to 10 p.m. because we just couldn't wait to get this going. I hope this is as much fun by the end of it for you as it is for us. First question for me is when are we going to get to Mars?
Well, I think we'll get to, when will we get the first people to Mars? I think we have a decent shot of doing that in about, I'd say I'd call it 5 years, something like that. So Earth and Mars sync up every 26 months. That's when we're in roughly the same quadrant of the solar system, and where we can do interplanetary transfer. And so we had one about 6 months ago, so about a year and a half, there'll be another one. So figure, I don't know, 5.5 years.
5.5 years. So what does it take from here to that point? What are the milestones you think for us to get to 5 years out? We are landing on Mars.
Well, we've got to make a Starship fly, get to go to orbit and back repeatedly. The essential elements are you need a fully and rapidly reusable orbital rocket. This is the holy grail of rocketry. So no one has ever succeeded in creating a fully reusable rocket. And it can't just be fully reusable, it needs to be rapidly reusable, so it doesn't take several months of refurbishment between flights. It needs to be much like aircraft, where the cost of an air flight is the biggest component of that is fuel. And you can't just be throwing rockets away every time. And then you need to have orbital refilling, so where you can send the ship up to orbit, then send another ship up, dock with a transfer propellant, so that you can load up to being almost full with propellant and then go to Mars. And if you've got a large, fully rapidly reusable rocket with orbital refilling that uses high efficiency, low cost propellant, then you can go to Mars. And then one last thing is, on Mars, you need local propellant production. So you take CO2 out of the atmosphere, combine it with water ice, H2O, to create oxygen. And if you have those elements, life can become multiplanetary, and we can have a self-sustaining city on Mars, which I think is one of the most important things we could possibly do for ensuring the long-term existence of consciousness.
You've spoken about this often, which is, expanding the scope of consciousness and how it is tied to multiplanetary life. Could you explain what that means for you and why that matters to you?
Sure. Well, so originally I had sort of kind of an existential crisis when I was a kid, trying to figure out what's the meaning of life, why are we here, what's the point of it all, is it all meaningless? I got quite depressed, actually, and sad about it. And then the thing that kind of broke me out of it was reading Douglas Adams's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where he essentially pointed out that the universe is the answer, and really the hard part is figuring out what questions to ask about the answer that is the universe. So, yeah, exactly. Trying to make fun of the fact that the answer is the easy part, but the questions are the hard part. So in order for us to gain a better understanding of what questions to ask or to understand what it's all about, we have to increase the scope and scale of consciousness so that we're better able to figure out which questions to ask and answer them. So the broader in scope, larger in scale that consciousness is, the more likely we are to be able to answer these questions and figure out what the heck's going on. Why are we here? To answer the fundamental questions. And I think there's arguably a great filter that we face with will we become a multi-planet species or not. We'd be surprised if out there in our galaxy and others that there are a whole bunch of dead one-planet civilizations that prospered for a while. They might have prospered for millions of years, but then gradually the civilization collapsed for reasons external or internal, and that was that. All civilizations go through an arc where they go up in technology complexity, but then they don't keep going up. They over time they decline, they fall, and this has happened obviously with if you're a student of history with many civilizations in the past. You can look at ancient Egypt. 5,000 years ago there was the Great Pyramid of Giza, but then the people living there forgot how to build pyramids after a while, and then they forgot how to read hieroglyphics. There's obviously Given's famous book about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire and how they had advanced technology in terms of roads, aqueducts, plumbing, and so forth, and then they basically people forgot about it. The ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, all these things have all gone through a similar arc, which suggests that most likely we will go through such an arc ourselves, and we'll be probably less resilient to recovery because of globalization. So I think for the first time in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth, it has been possible to extend life beyond Earth and make life multiplanetary. And this window of opportunity may be open for a long time. I hope it is, or it may be open for a short time. And I think it would be wise for us to assume that it's open for a short time. I'm an optimist, not a pessimist, but you have to say some chance it's only open for a short time, and we should take advantage of this brief window of opening where we can transport life to make life multiplanetary, and humanity is essentially the agent of life in this process. And I think we almost have an obligation to ensure that the creatures of Earth continue, even if there is a calamity, which, as I said, could be man-made or it could be some natural calamity. As if you look at the fossil record, there are many mass extinctions.
All of that makes sense. You've talked about this before. I think one other question I have is, when we get there, we have to set up the whole society. We have to set up civilization. How will the whole thing work in your mind? Everything from what does it mean to have internet connection in Mars, all the way to governments and rules and laws and everything.
Yeah, all those things need to happen, just as they happen in the U.S. and happen in every country. And I would not presume to prescribe what should happen there. I think the important part is just that we get people there and we get the equipment necessary to establish a self-sustaining civilization, at least one self-sustaining city. And I think the key threshold of when we would pass the great filter, of this particular great filter, is Mars sufficiently self-sustaining such that if the ships stop coming from Earth for any reason, it could be something massive or something banal. I mean, civilization on Earth could end with a bang or a whimper. But either way, if the ships stop coming from Mars, does Mars die out or not? And Mars only has to be missing one little ingredient, like the equivalent of vitamin C, and it will survive for a while, but it will eventually die out. So it's kind of getting a state on Mars to pass that critical threshold where it is self-sustaining. And are we able to do that before some calamity or a gradual decline in civilization occurs that prevents the ships from going there? That's the key threshold. In a more pithy way, is like the city on Mars becomes self-sustaining. Which comes first, a self-sustaining city on Mars or World War III?
If you kind of let yourself dream out over the next few decades, what would you consider success? Let's say they get through the first 5 years, even the first 10 years. What do you think is possible to build on Mars 10 years in, 20 years in, 30 years in, after first arrival?
I think Mars will start off being very, very tiny, just like a tiny little outpost. And by the way, it's going to be very dangerous. Sometimes people think, is this like some escape, a hatch for rich people? I'm like, no, it will be dangerous, hard work. It's going to be, you're out there on the frontier. There are far more ways to die there than there are on Earth. And a tremendous amount of hard work. But it will be, I think, fun and a great adventure. But it will not be a luxurious thing. That is for sure. Not for quite some time to go. But, we've got to build the propellant plant. We've got to build, solar power going, get the food production going, start creating the necessities, iron ore refinery. We need all of the sort of fundamentals of industry in order to ensure that Mars is a self-sustaining planet. I think over time, this would take a while, but terraform the planet and make it Earth-like, mostly by just warming it up.
So, as you talk about this, honestly, what comes to mind is sort of the idea that a Martian civilization, although obviously imported from Earth, it will quickly evolve to be quite a bit tougher by necessity. And just the mental images leaping in my mind is the Spartans in ancient Greece. Do you think that the sort of vector of civilization will unfold differently as a consequence of how difficult it's going to be to get it going?
Yeah, it probably will.
Then maybe we don't just have a backup, right? Maybe we actually have an alternative, like an ability to actually see two fundamentally different civilizations flourish.
Absolutely. The fact that you can only go to Mars every 2 years and that it's a 6-month journey, although I think we can over time get that potentially as low as 1 month, but still, you can't go to Mars when Earth is on the other side of the sun from Mars. Like there are times where Mars is literally on the other side of the sun. You can't get no matter what you do. So a time gap would mean that there'd be essentially a new group of people arriving roughly every 2 years. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting. People would probably trace I came on, this particular Earth-Mars synchronization event. I don't know. But the important thing is like that we have established Mars as a self-sustaining civilization, and that we have done whatever we can to ensure the long-term continuance of consciousness as we know it. Because so as far as we can tell, we've the light of consciousness, which is a delicate little candle in the dark. It's only here on Earth. I mean, it might be other places, and there's arguments that it's likely to be other places. But honestly, we have seen no sign of it, and I'm pretty sure that I would have known about it, and I've seen nothing to indicate that there was any alien civilization whatsoever. I'd be the first to jump on that in a second, but I've seen no such evidence.
Elon, that's actually something we wanted to ask you about, because in the last year, there's been multiple reported UFO sightings. There was the mysterious object that flew past our solar system. I think you just described that you haven't seen any evidence of aliens, but do you think we'll ever run into them? If we do, have you heard of dark forest theory from the three-body problem? How do you think we should think about aliens?
I'm trying to be strict in the scientific sense of the word, of saying I've seen not a single piece of conclusive evidence. So that doesn't mean there aren't aliens. I'm just literally saying I've seen nothing that could not be explained by other means, and where the probable explanation by other means is much more likely than it's alien technology. People are saying like there are sightings of aliens. I'm like, listen, man, the resolution of the picture needs to be at least like 7-Eleven ATM good. Okay, Loch Ness monster bullshit. It's like, come on, we've got like a 500 megapixel camera. What are you talking about? Where do you find that thing? It's going to be at least like iPhone 6 level, isn't it?
Can I ask one Mars question? If that's okay. So, you famously have a pile of really beautiful kids. I know you care about them a great deal, as all parents do. What would your response be if they start coming to you when they turn 18 or 22 and they say, Dad, now that you've landed us on Mars and there's a colony forming, like, I really want to go?
I think if we're talking about, say, the third or fourth set of landings on Mars, I think I'd be okay with that. Although I've followed them so far and none of them say they want to go. So they may change their minds, but currently they're not chomping at the bit to go to Mars.
Elon, okay. So I think for folks who may not know this, I think we originally met over Twitter. It's just safe to say, and I want to move on from Mars to memes. It is safe to say that you might be the master of the memes. And in fact, you had a quote, "Who controls the memes controls the universe." Could you just explain what you meant by that and how?
I mean, it's a play on words from Dune. Who controls the spice controls the universe. If memes are spice, then it's memes. I mean, there's a little bit of truth to it in that, like, how do you what is it that influences the zeitgeist? Like, how do things become interesting to people? And memes, like, actually kind of a complex form of communication that like a picture says 1,000 words and maybe a meme says 10,000 words. It's a complex picture with a bunch of meaning in it. And it's aspirationally funny. I don't know. I love memes. They can be very insightful. And, throughout history, the symbolism in general has powerfully affected people.
How did you get so good at them? I remember following you many years ago. Going from that to your sea shanties meme or the it may not be safe for work here.
If you go back to my very early tweets, technically I was on Twitter, I think in the very early days when there were only like maybe 10,000, less than 10,000 users. But then like people were just like tweeting like what kind of latte they had at the University Street Starbucks. And I was like, I don't need to know this. So then I deleted my Twitter account. And then a fake person got my Twitter account and tweeted for a few years. And then my friend Billy said, hey, you really should be on Twitter so you can speak directly to people. And so I was like, okay, my friend Billy convinced me to regain my Twitter account. And my early tweets are pretty racy, because I was reading this biography of Catherine the Great. Things went crazy from there.
By the way, I like how you say that your early tweets were racy and not like that.
People think like, oh, he's gone crazy on Twitter. I'm like, no, I started crazy on Twitter.
What are the new memes that you're following or creating right now? What are the ones that are interesting to you right now?
Well, I don't really follow memes.
You just make them.
I make some of them, and then some of them are sent to me. I have some pretty kick-ass meme dealers.
Yeah.
Meme dealers? Like,
you want at a good price.
Are there meme dealers on Mars? Wait.
You gotta have a good meme dealer.
There will be.
My friend Mike is a good meme dealer, and Claire as well, and Jake now, and quite a few others actually. I fortunately am the lucky recipient of a very interesting meme.
Today you posted about Neuralink and why people should be working there. share. For folks who don't know about it, I thought it was really cool, just the possibility of it. Just tell us more about it. There are a lot of engineers listening on this Clubhouse. What is Neuralink? Why should we care? What is possible with?
Sure. So the long-term, so Neuralink stems from a concern I had where I was trying to, even in a benign AI scenario, how do we at least go along for the ride? So, I mean, if for those that are following that closely, it's obviously improving dramatically. You know, if you see look at say GPT-2 versus GPT-3, and just how radically that's improved, and just like, deep minds, and I mean, I think they've run out of games to win at, basically. I say like at Tesla, it's an important thing note I should make is like Tesla actually has, I think, one of the strongest AI teams in the world, but it's AI team focused on real world usability. So just really solving vision, perception, and control with AI. But even in a benign scenario for AI, where let's say like the AI is like just really wants to be super nice to us and make us happy, well, how do we stay relevant and still have meaning and at least go along for the ride? That's in the good scenario. And then in terms of avoiding the bad scenario, to the degree we can couple collective human will to the outcome of artificial intelligence, what's developed in that way, I think that'll probably be a better scenario than if we're unable to effectively couple collective human will to that outcome. So people are already a cyborg, and then you already have a tertiary digital layer. You've got your sort of limbic system, which is your primitive drives and desires and responses, and then you've got your cortex, which is like long-term planning and thinking. Those are two biological layers. And then there's a tertiary third layer, which is digital, and you already have that in the form of your phones and computers and all your applications. You're far more powerful than a human would be without those cognitive enhancements. But the bandwidth between your cortex and your digital tertiary layer is very slow. And in fact, with the advent of phones, it got even slower. If you're thumbing, like say, what's the bit rate of a pair of thumbs on a phone? It's very low. I mean, let's be super generous and say it's 100 bits per second. Well, computers can communicate at trillions of bits per second. At a certain point, the computer gets smart enough, it's like the computer's just like trying to talk to a tree, Trees do sort of talk, but they talk so slow that we don't notice. So we need to improve the bandwidth. And with a direct neural interface, we can improve the bandwidth between your cortex and your digital tertiary layer by many orders of magnitude. I'd say probably at least 1,000 or maybe 10,000 or more. And we could also spend a lot more time thinking about interesting things as opposed to taking complex thought structures, compressing them down into words, which is also, again, a very low bit rate, and then having someone else receive those words, decompress them, and then send words back at you. So a huge amount of our brain power spent in compression, decompression, and we could be instead spending it on deeper concepts. If you had a Neuralink, if two people had a Neuralink, you could do conceptual telepathy, where you have a complex series of concepts, and you could just transfer them directly, uncompressed, to the person. This would massively improve the quality of communication and the speed of it. So, and then other sort of pretty wild things that could be done, like you could probably save state in the brain, and so if you were to die, your state could be returned either in the form of another human body or a robot body. This is getting like really much weird sci-fi stuff here. From carbon. Go on. Carbon, yeah, exactly. And I think you could decide if you want to be a robot or a person or whatever. And you wouldn't be exactly the same. There'd be a little lost in transfer, but you could also say it's also arguably true that when you wake up in the morning, you're not exactly the same as yesterday. Or the you of a month ago is not the same as the you of today. I mean, a bunch of brain cells have died, and some memories have faded, some have strengthened, there are new memories. So anyway, the point is like there could be something analogous to a video game, like a saved game situation where you are able to resume, upload your last state, kind of like Altered Carbon. Maybe lose a few memories, but mostly be you. Now, that's the long-term stuff. In the short term, for Neuralink, the idea would really just be to address brain injuries or spinal injuries and, make up for whatever lost capacity somebody has with an implanted chip. So the first thing that we're going after is a wireless implanted chip that would enable someone who's a quadriplegic or tetraplegic to control a computer or mouse or their phone or really any device just by thinking. And this obviously would be a massive enabler and make life way easier for them. There have been sort of primitive versions of this device, one done with like wires sticking out of your head, but it doesn't work all the time, and you can't take it home with you. So just having basically, you think like in simplistic terms, I'd say it's sort of like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires that go to your brain. Fit in your skull with tiny wires. So if somebody who's listening is good at designing like Fitbits, Apple Watches, phones, computers of various kinds, then actually they would be a great fit for We'll probably be releasing some new videos showing progress maybe in a month or so. And because we already got like a monkey with a wireless implant in their skull and the tiny wires who can play video games using his mind. So it does not look like an unhappy monkey. And you can't even see where the neural implant was put in, except for that he's got like a slight like dark mohawk. He's not uncomfortable and he doesn't look weird. When the USDA person came through and inspected our monkey facilities, she said it was like the nicest monkey facilities she's ever seen in her entire career. Just FYI. We went the extra mile for the monkeys.
As long as you didn't make them play Cyberpunk.
That would be a hell of a trip for a monkey. One of the things we're trying to figure out is like, can we have the monkeys play mind pong with each other? Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
I have to say, the pig demo was really fantastic. That was really cool.
Thanks. It's great seeing Neuralink and making good progress. And like I said, I want to be clear, like the early applications will really just be for people who've had a serious brain injury. It's like the value of the implant would be enormous because obviously the early implants will come with some non-trivial risk. And so it's going to be like, okay, does the good far outweigh the bad? And then there would be a candidate for some of the initial surgeries with full disclosure of like these little risks and everything. And one of the things we're really paying close attention to is the ability to remove the implant. It's not like if it doesn't want it or it's not working, we can take it out and then we can reimplant another one. So we've tested implantation, removal, and reimplantation. It works great.
Switching topics, I mentioned kids earlier. As it turns out, I have a very bright and inquisitive 5-year-old who is crawling all over everything and trying to figure everything out and learning as much as he can, as fast as he can. With everything that we know now and kind of all the modern tools that we have, what's the best way to think about educating a 5-year-old in today's world?
The best way to educate a 5-year-old?
Educate a 5-year-old and then think about kind of his education over the course of the next 5 or 10 years. What kind of program ideally should you think a kid should be on?
Well, my observation is my kids were mostly educated by YouTube and Reddit, and then I guess classmates. I guess there were lessons as well, but judging by the amount of time they spent online, it seemed like most of their education is actually coming from online. I think generally with education, you want to make it as interesting and exciting as possible. What are all the things like, say, a good video game does to keep someone engaged and interested? If kids can be super engaged in video games, I think there's a way for them to be super engaged in education as well. Like one of the things that's I think very fundamental is to explain the why of things. Like, so we're teaching you this, but we're going to explain why we're teaching you this and why it is relevant. I mean, we've evolved to forget things that are irrelevant or have low relevance probability. That makes sense. Like otherwise we'd remember all sorts of nonsense things that are very important to our future. So unless relevance is established clearly, then people will have a hard time remembering it by its nature because it appears to be irrelevant. It might be relevant, but if it's not explained to them, they won't know. And then if you want to have some sort of if you're trying to say problem solving, some sort of engaging narrative for the problem solving. Like it's far better to say, okay, we're going to teach you how an engine works by taking apart an engine and then putting it back together. And let's find out what tools are needed in order to take this engine apart and put it back together. It's like, okay, we need screwdrivers and wrenches and Allen keys, and we need a winch and a bunch of other things. And then you understand the relevance, and it's much more of an interesting problem. This is much better than having, say, a course on wrenches or a course on screwdrivers. You just like start with a problem and say, what tools are needed to solve this problem? That establishes relevance and gives a compelling narrative thread.
Yeah, it seems like you could kind of, if you had sort of elaborate enough projects, you could roll a huge number of topics and then ultimately kind of combine it into a single project with some really actually interesting form of output, literally building a vehicle or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. You just have a narrative thread of why is it all establish relevance and there's a story to it. You can't turn that bolt without the wrench. And then let's see, how can we make this engine better? What do we need to do? Okay, let's calculate, if it's a gasoline engine, how do you get to a higher RPM or, better compression ratio? I'm using like an outdated analogy of engines, but you can say for an electric motor, what steps would you need to take to get higher torque, higher power out of this electric motor? And you can explain, it's obvious why things like Maxwell's equations become necessary in that situation.
You would not believe the number of parents and people who've asked us about tonight, and I think there are two questions that are connected. One is, how do kids, if you're having a kid and you want to teach them to become a polymath like you have become, what advice do you have for parents? And the next one is, here you are with so many companies that you've created that I can't even list them off the top of my head. Why doesn't the world have, and this doesn't mean to sound psychopathic, but why doesn't the world have more Elon Musk?
Well, I don't know. I might be getting too much credit here. So, I mean, for me, these things I've done have been because I felt a strong compulsion to do them. So it's not like nobody was pushing me to do it, but they're just like I felt strong to do them. I mean, I wouldn't say there are pretty long sections of my life that have been very painful and difficult, and I'm not sure people would want to do that, If somebody wants to be me or do the things I've done, I would say most probably you're mistaken. You do not want to do that. You'd have to have some kind of like rage demon in your skull that you just got to get it done. It's like when people ask me, like, what encouraging words do you have for entrepreneurs who want to do a startup? And my response is, if you need encouraging words, don't do a startup. My friend Billy, doing a startup is like eating glass and staring into the abyss for a long time.
We're going to switch topics just to make it but for everyone in the audience who just caught up and managed to squeeze in, just a quick reset/recap. This is the one and only Elon Musk, and this is a show that we do every single day. I know a lot of you are trying to get in the room. There are a bunch of overflow rooms, see if we can get in there, but we're just having an amazing conversation with Elon. Elon, okay, this is something you joked about, but I'm kind of curious to get a maybe serious answer to this, which is all things cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. You famously just changed your Twitter bio to just the Bitcoin logo and the word Bitcoin this week. What do you think of cryptocurrency? What do you think of Bitcoin? What do you think of other cryptocurrencies? We'd love to get your take on the entire thing.
Well, yeah, I gotta watch what I say here, because some of these things can really move the market. First of all, I should say, like, many friends of mine have tried to convince me to get involved in Bitcoin for a long time, like, from when it just popped out there. My friend, my bully, he actually had Bitcoin cake that was like, had a big sort of Bitcoin symbol on it, and he fed me a slice of Bitcoin cake in 2013. So, I mean, I should have at least bought some Bitcoin 8 years ago. What more do people need to do? You know, like, Jesus, talk about being late to the party. So I was a little slow on the uptake there. My apologies, but I do at this point think Bitcoin is a good thing. I am a supporter of Bitcoin. You know, like I said, I'm late to the party, but I'm a supporter of Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin is really on the verge of getting broad acceptance by sort of the conventional finance people. I don't have a strong opinion on other cryptocurrencies. Occasionally I make jokes about Dogecoin, but they are really just meant to be jokes. But Dogecoin was made as a joke to make fun of cryptocurrencies, obviously. But fate loves irony. And often, as a friend of mine says, the most ironic outcome is most likely, or I like to say the most entertaining outcome is often most likely. And arguably, the most entertaining outcome and the most ironic outcome would be that Dogecoin becomes the currency of Earth in the future.
Oh my God. Elon, when you tweeted me this afternoon, I will say my tweet replies have been overwhelmed by probably like a zillion different like cryptocurrency coins. And you might remember the infamous time when your replies were filled with cryptocurrency bots on Twitter.
Oh my God, it was insane.
That was actually how Elon and I actually wound up meeting, because that was a very painful time.
And then I made a joke about Bitcoin, and my account got locked.
I had to actually try and convince some folks that was actually the block. So I want to bring us back to one of your companies. We actually have a Tesla Model S sitting outside our house right now. It carries us and our 2-year-old baby. I love it. Would love to just get your take on where you see you just have a refresh of the Model S coming out. I just saw the review for it. Where is the future for Tesla, and especially when it comes to all things battery technology and self-driving? Those are two topics I think a lot of people are very interested in.
Okay, you're asking me about the future of batteries and self-driving?
More like Tesla over the next few years.
I mean, the goal with Tesla is to, and has been from the beginning, is to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy. So in order to do that, we've got to make a lot of cars. We've got to make them increasingly affordable. And our rough target is we want to be able to eventually make 20 million cars a year. And the reason for that is there's 2 billion active cars and trucks on the road. And figure if you're not really moving the needle unless you're changing 1% of the existing fleet. And so that's roughly how we came up with 20 million cars and trucks per year. That's very important to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy. And then, of course, stationary battery packs and solar, which is making a lot of progress on that front. We're going to try to grow car production as fast as possible. The primary limiting factor there is battery cell production. We're getting as much as possible from suppliers, and that is not enough. We're actually going to be building battery cells ourselves. Let's emphasize that we've got great suppliers, that we're not trying to put them out of business. We want them to increase their rate as well. So Panasonic, LG, and CATL. And then to accelerate sustainable energy further, we're making our own cells. I'm pretty excited about that. So I think you expect possibly an acceleration of compounding annual growth, well, at least aspirationally, that's our goal. And that combine that with autonomy, and it's a very powerful story, because once you have autonomy, self-driving cars, you massively increase the utility of any given car. A typical car is driven about 12 hours a week, maybe depending on the situation where you live. It's like maybe an hour and a half a day or something like that. Or in LA, it might be 2 hours a day. So roughly 12 hours a week. And there's 168 hours in a week, in a 7-day week. Most likely cars that are autonomous could maybe do a third of the hours in the week. So maybe they do, 60 hours a week of usage instead of 12. So you basically a 5x increase in asset utilization there, and far less need for less parking garages and that kind of thing. This in itself is good for the environment because you need fewer cars to get the same thing done. We would need fewer parking garages and places just to keep cars when they're not in use, because they'd just be in use a lot more. But the net of like having a lot of cars times automation or times self-driving, I think is at the heart of why a lot of investors think Tesla is worth what it is. They're giving us a lot of credit for future execution, but I think the trend is there is quite positive. I'd like to once again say, if anyone is interested in practical AI, where the rubber hits the road, please join Tesla's Autopilot/AIT. I think people don't quite appreciate that Tesla has some of the most advanced AI in the world, both on the software side and on the hardware side. And on the hardware side, we've obviously got our inference computer, which I think is still the best inference computer out there, even though it's been going for a couple of years. We're building Dojo, which will be the most powerful training computer, because it's going to process vast amounts of video training data. And bringing the day of self-driving sooner translates directly to lives saved and injuries avoided. Because about 1 million people die every year in car accidents, and about 10 million per year have serious injuries. So that's the sooner the better, and a lot of lives will be saved and people's lives made better if it happen sooner.
On self-driving, you made headlines, I think, a while back when you basically, to put it mildly, criticized LiDAR as a key technology for self-driving. Could you talk more about that and why you're not such a huge fan of LiDAR?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm just talking smack,
No, we didn't know that.
It's time I confess. So, first of all, I'm not like fundamentally against LiDAR on all things, because for the SpaceX Dragon that docks with the space station, we actually developed and built our own LiDAR for docking with the space station. So, obviously, if I hated LiDAR, we would not have done that. And this is like 10 years ago we started doing that. So, I don't have some sort of weird tags to LiDAR. However, for driving on real-world roads, you have to solve vision. Basically, understanding objects with passive optical photons and then making sense of those objects. So like vision perception, what do those objects mean? What are they going to do? What is their likely path of travel? And then control. And all of that really is AI. The way we're doing it is by running a bunch of neural nets in our head. So we've got to run a bunch of neural nets to do the same thing in the car. And at the point at which you solve passive optical, and this is better passive optical than a human has, because you've got 8 cameras, 3 of which point directly forward, 2 that are diagonally forward, and 2 that are diagonally rear, and 1 rear. So the way we do it right now is we have all 8 cameras synchronized so you've got 8 frames collected simultaneously, and we're moving towards, but have in fact mostly moved towards video training. So you've got 8 surround cameras. It's like kind of a surreal thing to see. People have 2 eyes, but kind of like really more like 1 eye, because the 2 eyes kind of combine. But anyway, the neural net is basically, it needs to move to full video training, video inference, surround video training, surround video inference, and then it will be superhuman, no question about it. That's just because people don't have eyes in the back of their head. Like you basically have, effectively a human, for all intents and purposes, it's like having 1 camera on a slow gimbal. And that is often distracted and maybe sort of drunk, or change the radio, or they fall asleep, or there's all sorts of things that go wrong. There's no question that you can be superhuman with just cameras. And I think if one is going to go with sort of active photon generation, I would recommend something in the occlusion penetrating wavelengths, sort of roughly 4 millimeter radar or something like that would be better if you're going to really delve into the arena of active photon generation.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Also, I love how deep you got into that. It was super, super fun. All right, I'm going to switch topic just a bit. I would safe to say a lot of people are very interested in how you work. For example, describe yourself as an engineer. So walk us through, it's Monday morning, you wake up. What does a typical work day in the life of Elon look like?
I'll wake up and see if any emergencies on text or email, and often there are. So, I mean, a ton of what I deal with is not actually fun or interesting. It's like chores. So I've tried really hard not to do my chores, but then if I don't do my chores, things go to hell. So, oh man, you have to do your chores.
Big relief that Elon Musk basically has the same schedule as the rest of us. We all do, and you too. And it's kind of, there's something just really relieving just hearing you say that.
I mean, that's pretty much how it goes these days. I do enjoy the in-person meetings more than email. In fact, I'm getting a slight negative limbic reaction to email. It's killing me. Texts are way better to deal with, and then in-person meetings are much better. Even Zoom meetings or whatever, they're still better than email. Anything's better than email, frankly. I'll have a bunch of meetings. I'll write email, write text, especially if it's like an email to the group, like saying, hey, I think we need to change direction and do the following things, and let me know if you think otherwise, but otherwise we've got to do these things and get our act together in this area or that area. But most of my meetings are engineering and design, but of course we have to deal with finance and sales and other things, the things that are necessary for a company to function. And then there's a lot of context switching, and so he sent me the meme of fear is not not the mind killer. Context switching is the mind killer, which I totally agree with. The context switching is a real bear. So we just basically try to do less context switching. So maybe focus on one thing for an hour and then another thing for another hour. It's really hard to context switch between SpaceX and Tesla and all the things that are going on in SpaceX and Tesla, and then Neuralink, Boring Company, which fortunately pretty low bandwidth. They don't take a high level of CPU load because they're smaller, and there's their personal stuff, and of course memes. I better get paid by now.
You're calling up your meme dealer. We spoke to Mark about how he spends his time, and Mark talked about, when he was younger, he used to have large blocks of open time on his calendar. What does your calendar look like? Are you allocated 30 minutes back to back for open space?
I don't have a lot of open space. It's generally back-to-back meetings, and it's insane. I mean, my days are like insane torrents of information. But sometimes you want to like audit what I do for a day. It's insane. I don't recommend it. I mean, yeah. I was thinking like, man, how long can I keep this up? Because I don't want my brain to explode. And it's like the meetings that are scheduled are not like nice to have meetings. They're like, this meeting is essential. Like, okay, it's pretty intense. I was thinking like maybe I should like at some point like take a week off or something. In my mind. I know there's like a bunch of people like writing books on Tesla and SpaceX, for example. Like it's pretty hard for them to get it right because they just weren't there. And maybe I should write some like book of my experiences that has all the foolish mistakes I've done and some advice for others that might be helpful.
I think so. A book, a documentary. I remember once hearing about how do you still sleep on the floor of your factory? I remember you used to at one point in time.
I did. I haven't. I only if there's like a crisis situation, and I actually. It's like basically when the team is being asked to really work super hard, I got to be right there with them. They got to see it. Seeing is believing. And so if I'm just sleeping in the middle of the factory floor and sort of going to sleep at 4 a.m, like waking up like 4 hours later, like they literally see me. They walk past me. It's not like hidden or anything. And it's like, okay, if CEO is willing to fucking take that level of pain, then they'll do it too.
I was going to say, when you first said you slept in the factory, I figured there must be like an executive floor or something, and you must have like the couch, and it must be like a nice setup. And then, when I came over to see you that one time, it's like you have your conference room is literally in the middle of the factory, and like the giant, sure, I'm pardon my swearing, but I have to. The giant fucking robots are like 15 feet away.
Yeah.
And they're pounding metal, and it's like ear splitting, and your factory is like literally, or your room is like literally right in the middle of it. And then I saw your sleeping bag in the conference room, so I assume that's where you're sleeping. I didn't see any other rooms. Like in the factory, it's like that's intense.
Most of the time, I did not sleep in the conference room because people could not see me in the conference room, so I slept on the floor outside the conference room. Because otherwise, people know. They don't know. Seeing is believing. So I most days sleep on the floor outside the conference room so they could see that I was there.
Even more advanced level.
Yeah, that's world of hurt. And I always would wake up and smell like oil and iron filings. It was rough. I was asking people to really go all out, and I can't expect them to go all out if I'm not doing the same thing.
That's super interesting because when people think, again, I'm not saying this to flatter you. When people think, how does the richest person in the world live? They don't think uncomfortably sleeping outside a conference room with like a lot of loud banging going on right next door.
They probably don't, but the people at the factory do. They saw it themselves. That's what's important.
Okay, I love it. Switching topic just a little bit. You have your hands full with SpaceX and Tesla and the Boring Company and Neuralink. If you somehow magically found an extra 5 hours in a day and you had to start another company or another effort, what would you start?
Well, I'm definitely have no plans to start yet another thing. I definitely.
Like the gladiator meme. Are you not entertained enough? Have you not created enough?
I think there are still tremendous opportunities in tunneling. For 5 years, people asked me what do I see opportunities, and I'd say tunneling, and then nobody did anything. So then, actually, initially as a joke, created the Boring Company, and we did like a test tunnel in LA, and then still people didn't believe us, and then so we just did our first operational tunnel in Vegas. But the world really needs tunnels because all major cities have traffic, and tunnels can massively improve people's quality of life. They're making it easier to travel from one place to another in a city, and then that can be further expanded to long distance travel, where if you just draw a vacuum on the tunnel, then you can go extremely faster than a plane or a high-speed rail. I'd really still recommend, can someone else say, please start a tunneling company, that'd be great. Then there's RNA or mRNA, basically synthetic viruses, which is we've seen put to good effect with Biotech and Moderna. But I think people don't quite appreciate that what's actually going on is the digitization of medicine. So it's where you can just literally create an RNA or DNA sequence like a computer program and then encapsulate that in a lipid shell so it looks like a tasty treat for your cells. You can literally do anything. This is absolutely the future of medicine. I mean, when I say, you could probably figure out how to turn someone into a literal butterfly. Okay, it's just your cells are biological computers. They execute just like a sort of old school computer where you'd feed it like a tape or a punch card. That's you feed the cells, which are tiny biological computers, a punch card, and they will do whatever that punch card says. So that was probably a big eye opener for 2020 of like just the understanding the potential of RNA. And then just super randomly, Tesla actually is making a fairly advanced RNA sort of microfab or something where currently for Cure, but we're open to making it for other companies as well.
I'm not sure I understand this. Why is Tesla making an RNA fab?
It's super random. So like about a little over 4 years ago, we acquired a company in Germany primarily they're very good at automation. They're called Groman, and they're in southern Germany near basically a city of Chrome. And at the time of the acquisition, they said like, look, we're willing to be acquired, but there's like just a couple of projects that we think, even though they're not related to automotive, we really like to continue, if you don't mind. The two projects were, one is this like tiny chip analyzer, or like a thing with tiny wires for analyzing chips that Intel needs for making CPUs, and then another one was this Biotech thing for there's three parts to it. There's a DNA multiplier, an RNA multiplier, and something which puts then the lipid shell on the RNA sequence. We're on like version 3 of it now, and they said could they keep going? So if you keep it under 10% of resources, no problem, you can keep going. And then I don't know, it turns out it may actually be useful.
I just love that you accidentally filled with an RNA fab. By the way, you've been talking a lot about how mRNA obviously has been key to the Moderna vaccines and all the COVID-19 vaccines, which brings me to COVID. Let us say somehow magically tomorrow you were running the vaccine effort, the distribution effort right now. What would you do to get the vaccines up?
Specifically around the logistics side, which we just don't seem to be doing a good job across the world. So what would you do differently there?
Well, I don't have good insight into the situation as it stands, but I think relaxing the requirements on there's like seems to be there are too many requirements of who can get the vaccine. The vaccine really is important for anyone with elderly or has a compromised immune system or is otherwise at risk for the virus. I think really just saying like first come first serve. Show up here, like use CVS and Walgreens, which give out the flu vaccine every year, and say okay, just show up here, and especially for the Moderna and Biotech vaccines, which are quite temperature sensitive, they can only be sort of defrosted from the deep freeze briefly, and then they must be used or they lose their effectiveness. This is because, my understanding, because the RNA sequences they use are not stable. Those sequences want to revert to something else. Because they're not stable, they must be frozen at a very low temperature, or they will simply want to revert to a lower energy state RNA sequence. That's my understanding of it. So just like, instead of worrying about this, is the exact right person going to get the vaccine, just accept that maybe some people who shouldn't get the vaccine will get it, but we will still get a hell of a lot more vaccines out there. And let's not worry about the details here. Let's just get it to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And for sure, we should not worry about the second dose quite yet. Just give everyone the first dose. I suspect that the immunity granted by the first dose is very significant. And, that the second dose is like 3 or 4 weeks later. So we've got plenty of time to think about the second dose. Just worry about the first dose and first come, first served. And don't worry about like accidentally giving the damn thing to someone who maybe didn't deserve it. That will happen a little bit. So that's my recommendation on that front. We are going to be an avalanche of vaccine coming. I think the U.S. may have ordered something like 900 million doses. And the combination of we were going to have so much COVID vaccine. I guarantee you it will be thrown away later this year, more than we could possibly ever need or want. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine just got approved, which is that's good because it's a more conventional vaccine, but it's a single shot, room temperature. And there are more and more vaccines that are going to get approved. Hopefully the CureVac one will be approved soon. I know the Tesla machine, it can make a bazillion doses super fast. I think there's definitely, for those who are concerned about the vaccine, you expect an exponential increase in vaccine availability. And then combined with that, we are, I think, starting to approach some degree of herd immunity with people who contract the virus and recovered. So, which is actually better than getting a vaccine. The antibody reaction is better than if you got the vaccine. So, yeah, could go on and on about it. But overall, I think, optimistic message that there will be lots of vaccines. And I would really encourage people to take the vaccine. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I want to be clear. I'm a pro-vaxxer.
Speaking of vaccine, California has been sort of bouncing between kind of 40th and 50th in the country, by states in terms of the speed of the rollout. And for me, it raises this question that's been coming up more and more, which is, you and I and a lot of people here listening have built our company companies primarily in California up until now. What's your view on the future of California from here?
Well, I mean, first of all, I should say I love California, and I've lived half my life, more than half my life in California. Just like I am Californian, like so much of I built my companies here. I came here came to Silicon Valley as a summer intern to work on energy storage technology for electric vehicles way back in like 92, I think it was, 92 or 93. There's a little company called Pinnacle Research in Los Gatos. I got to Silicon Valley as soon as I could. And then at Stanford, I was going to be working on sort of advanced capacitors for use in electric vehicles studies, and ended up putting that on hold for the internet. And trying to get a job at Netscape, by the way.
So I have heard that story indirectly. I would actually like for you to tell it so that I can learn what mistake I made.
Okay, well, first of all, I wouldn't say I did a very good job of trying to get a job at Netscape, but I was convinced that the internet would be the future. Essentially, humanity communicated by osmosis.